Hi everybody, I'm Aryan Rasoulipour. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and to this new podcast. Today I want to talk about cognitive linguistic approach in learning a new language in juxtaposition between men and women. What do you think? Which gender are in priority and better in performance to learn a new language and acquire it? Let me talk about it. These are several reported differences in how men and women approach and perform language learning, though the findings can be complex and are influenced by both biological and social cultural elements. Generally, studies often show that females tend to outperform males on various measures of language proficiency, particularly in skills like speaking and writing. Okay. In cognitive and biological differences in brain organization and processing are often cited as potential routes for variations in language learning. Brain lateralizations in females are generally due to have a more bilateral representation for language, whereas language tends to be more lateralized in males. This bilateral activation in women may contribute to greater verbal fluency and proficiency in them. In processing style, some studies suggest that girls or women, both of them, female gender, utilize a more abstract language network in the brain, engaging areas associated with speech production and abstract thinking, whereas boys or men, on the other hand, may rely more on sensory areas, auditory and visual ones, when processing a new language, or even their mother tongue's acquiration under 5 years old ages. And verbal memory about it, women have been associated with a superior declarative memory system, okay, which could give them an advantage in tasks requiring long-term linguistic knowledge. And about learning and strategies, men and women often adopt various and different strategies when learning a new language. For example, in a strategy to use a new language, typically female learners tend to use social strategies more than interacting with native people like this, and more than metacognitive strategies and like planning and self-monitoring. They often use more holistic approach, in the other words. But typically male learners may prefer more analytical, vice versa in the opposite of the female learners, or form a focused strategy such as rote memorization, and strategies involve visual aids and technology, computer-assisted language learning, or COL. But about motivations, fields, and realms, females often exhibit higher integrative motivation, meaning that they are driven by a desire to connect with the culture and community of the target language speakers. They may also show higher initial interest, but males may show more instrumental motivation in learning a new language for a specific particular practical goal, like a job, career advancements, for instance. And in class, females more likely to be active in classes, take initiative, and express a higher desire to learn. Maybe males are less engaged in general classroom settings for language learning. And about their differences in performance skills, the superior performance often observed in females is typically found in specific areas. Skills like speaking and writing, women consistently show better results in speaking and writing tasks in a second language. And about vocabulary and fluency, females often exhibit better verbal fluency and a larger vocabulary in both first and second languages, an advantage that appear early in their childhood. And reading and listening, there are differences in performance for reading and listening comprehensions tend to be less pronounced or inclusive. And social cultural contexts, it's important to note that maybe observed differences may be due to social cultural expectations and education systems rather than purely biological factors. For example, language arts and humanities are often as socialized as a female-dominant fields, which can influence interests, efforts, and confidence. Okay, but if we want to know much more about these learning strategies, we should going deeper inside the heart of and gist of the cognitive linguistic, that the cognitive linguistic perspective on gender differences learning focuses on how mental processing and conceptualization and experiential factors rather than just abstract rules, influences, acquisitions, and often reinforcing the field finding that women tend to have an advantage in overall second language or L2 proficiency. This framework is particularly relevant because it views a language learning not as a mastery or formal syntax rules, but as the acquisition of construction networks, built up through usage and grounded in human experiences. Cognitive linguistics also draws heavily on findings from neuroscience to suggest differences in how the two gender brains handle linguistic input and output in processing load. Firstly, holistic versus analytical processing. Studies suggest that female learners, as I mentioned beforehand in advance, tend to engage a more distributed network in the brain, including the areas that are associated with abstract thinking and speech production. This may enable a more holistic and integrative approach to language, which is beneficial for overall fluency and production skills. Conversely, male learners or boys often show activation constructed in auditory and visual processing areas, suggesting a more analytical or firm-focused approach, which may favor tasks involving a specific sensory input like reading or visual memorization. It's a reputational data. And cognitive load and memory. Women often exhibit a stronger verbal memory, which is crucial for usage-based models of language acquisition, since second language or L2 acquisition involves a statistical learning, unconsciously tracking and acquiring high-frequency patterns and constructions. Superior verbal memory could given a woman an age in forming and retrieving these complex forms and meaning mappings quickly, thus reducing cognitive load during production. Is the advantage of all women. And about embodied cognition and conceptualization, I should mention a core tenet of cognitive linguistics is embodied cognition. The idea that abstract thoughts, including language, is grounded in all physical experiences, sensory, motor systems, and emotional states. Gender differences emerge here through varied social and emotional experiences. Okay. As this theory explains like this, we should understand conceptual metaphor and image schemas in linguistics. In languages, relies heavily on conceptual metaphors. For example, something like this. Argument is a war, and image schemas like container, path, which are abstractual, mental structures derived from recurring bodily experiences. And the social embodiment, women are often socialized to focus more interpersonal relationship and emotional nodes. This leads them to excel in understanding and using pragmatics and social strategies in L2 or second language learning. For example, using filter words like politeness markers, integrating into L2 social network, which are forms of embodied action. And about emotional congresses, researchers suggest that women and men may process language differently based on emotional content. For example, women language differently based on emotional content and might process sentences about sad events with greater ease, while male and men, in the other word, might process sentences about angry events more easily due to established gender differences in emotional reactivity. Okay. This emotional congruence may influence how easily different types of and sorts of communicative contents are comprehended and stored in second language learning and acquisition process. And social and usage-based factors and elements, cognitive linguistics supports a usage-based view on substantial second language acquisition, or SLA, where proficiency is built from the frequency of exposure and use. Gender differences in learning styles and motivation impact this usage. A strategy to use is that female learners frequently report using more social and metacognitive strategies like planning, self-monitoring, and something like this, etc. In a cognitive framework, this means they actively seek more contextualized real-world usage for their input and output both. And consciously, they manage their learning system to maximize the detection and storage new constructions. And integrative versus instrumental motivation is the finding that women often show higher integrative motivation, or in the other words, desire to connect with the target culture is much more higher in them in comparison to males, is highly significant fact. This motivation leads to increased interaction, as I mentioned, in advance, and exposure to authentic usage of event, which is fundamental input required to build L2 construction network according to cognitive linguistic principles. Men's tendency, on the other hand, towards instrumental motivation might lead to less diversified and less socially integrated language in use, practically. To sum up, in summary, for a cognitive linguistic perspective, the observed advantage for women in L2 learning often stems from a combination of neurocognitive advantages in holistic processing and verbal memory, and social cognitively driven strategies that promote crucial usage-based exposure and embodied contextualized learning necessary for fluent L2 acquisition. That's it. Thank you for attending on my YouTube channel and watching this and listening to this podcast. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribing to channel, and push the notification for further videos that I would upload throughout the channel. Whenever it's uploaded, you will be notified by notifications. Until the next time, farewell, good luck, and goodbye.